welcome everybody back to the final session of the Big Picture 2 Benthic Imagery Workshop. In this session, we will aim to bring together information from all of the preceding sessions in a summary. As we go along, we're aiming to close things down again, close things in, and focus ourselves to thinking ahead and going forward, and in particular thinking about what are our next steps and what is the longer term future of our benthic imagery collaboration through the big picture. So to kick us off, I'll just give us a quick recap of the sessions that we've been through over the last 3 days. To begin with, I gave us a little recap of the journey so far, where things began a couple of years ago and through the development of the action plan, the formation of the big picture group, and the development of the project working groups. Next up, we went through the earlier, I guess, the earliest successes of these collaborations, which led to the formation of Benthic Imagery Purposes, a quality assurance framework, which is currently being developed but nearly finished, and an Epiphone identification protocol. That is, the first version is nearly finished, but it'll have ongoing development. In our second day, we looked at the interesting angles of kind of the digital side of benthic imagery, considering the data flows, collating data into catalogs, managing it, archiving it, and then to what extent can we use artificial intelligence algorithms to interrogate that. And then in the afternoon, we then ran through some pretty big topics, sort of identification approaches that you apply to imagery, how you count things. One note is it's no longer enumeration approaches, it's quantification approaches. So already this slide is defunct. But then also sort of imagery annotation software that we're all starting to use increasingly. And finally, today, we had a really interesting session to kick things off this morning, hearing about what training approaches are already out there, the Smarter ID project, and thoughts on the entire workflow of benthic imagery and how we can bring these things together into guidance documents that can be of use for us all. And then touching on a topic fun to us all, going out and sampling, collecting the information itself. And there were numerous interesting discussions there. And that brings us up to now, where we're bringing it all together. So to bring it together for us, we are fortunate that our facilitators have been with us all the way through, Kirsten, Joey, Jess, and Steph. And each one of them in turn now are going to give us just a short summary of some of the key points that they picked up. There's so much that was raised in the chat and in the discussions that you know, the aim of this is not to go through every single thing. It's been quite a challenging job for the facilitators to keep on top of such wide-ranging conversations, but they've picked out some of the general points just to jog our memories, to bring us back, to bring everything back into this final session. So bear with us as we go through this. What we'd like to do is briefly pause after each summary and just ask ourselves, are there any other things that we've missed? And now's a good time to bring it all up. I'd like to run through all the summaries, please. I'll stop sharing my screen in case any of you guys have slides you'd like to put up. No worries if not. And first of all, there wasn't really much, I guess, to discuss in session one, really. But Kirsten, was there anything sort of general, just for a recap, to bring anyone who's just joining us now, to bring them up to speed on what happened in session one?
Yeah, so for anyone that didn't make it, basically Henk just talked us through the initial 2019 workshop and the development of the UK's Benthic Imagery Action Plan, and how that came to form the Big Picture Working Group. And then he also gave us a summary of the workshop that we had, just the day-long one that we had in November just gone, where we sort of established the project working groups and how the tasks of the action plan had been divided up into these groups. And then how each group put forward a point of contact or a lead to sort of form in turn the action plan coordination committee. So I'm sure quite a lot of you were probably involved in one or both of these workshops, and we've had a lot of interest since then in people getting involved with project working groups. So yeah, just to reiterate, if anyone is interested in getting involved with any of the work that's been discussed over the past few days, just email the Big Picture email at JNCC, and we can put you in contact with the right people.
Kirsten's quick summary of the first session. Any further points or comments on that? I'll just pause for a minute.
I can see Neil's hand up, Henk. I'm not sure if that's the same
Oh,
or if he's got a question for us.
Thanks,
brilliant.
Kirsten. It was just picking up something Henk mentioned about right at the start was, I guess, the desire within the action plan to shift away from that central facilitation to more of an autonomous group, sort of working through a coordination by the APCC. So I didn't know if, that needs to be expanded, or that was pretty straightforward for people to understand.
Well, that's great, Neil. Thanks for bringing that up. I was going to touch on that a little bit later on, but just for now, yeah, there's a general move here to shift things. I think we're getting more democratic about it now, you know, and we're I guess we've formed a steering group that coordinates the activities of the Big Picture Group, and that's the Action Plan Coordination Committee. And going forward, there'll be a much diminished role for the coordinator, which is a role I've been playing for a couple of years, and a far greater role for the group itself. But I'll come back to that like a little bit later on. Thanks for bringing it up, Neil. If there are no other comments there, then I'd like to move on to Joey, please, to provide a summary of the second session.
Thanks, Henk. Yeah, so session 2 focused on the early successes of the Benthic Imagery Action Plan. So we had 3 presentations. Henk talked us through the development of the purposes work. Jess talked us through the quality assurance framework work and the EIP. So what's been done on those so far, and Graham had a cameo in the quality assurance framework talk where he showed us a demo of some of the tools that have been developed. I guess thinking about the purposes work, some of the things that I noted down during the talks, there's some questions around can lessons learned from that work be shared more widely. There was a question about what will happen to the 4 purposes not taken forward. So we had a bit of a discussion around that. And there was a question from Barbara around the responsiveness for the questionnaires that were carried out as part of that work. And Henk reckoned there was about 40% responsiveness. I've done some research, and according to Nigel Lindemann, who's on the internet, 30% is the average response for these kind of questionnaires. That was in 2019, so well done. Then we turn on to the quality assurance framework and the EIP. Most of the discussion there focused on the purpose of the tools and how they link to annotation platforms. So quite an interesting conversation about that. and the requirement to kind of further explore the scale of imagery, which we've come back to throughout the workshop. So what's our unit? Are we looking at a still or a video or a segment of video? We talked about that, and that's something that can be picked up by the action plan coordination committee to see if there's a way of tackling that in a more concerted fashion. And then I guess finally on the EIP, we saw what's been done there, with a lot of discussion about the amount of things that need to happen to take the work forward, and we had a comment on that around, would it be possible to create species heat maps with geotagged images in there, which is again something for the group that takes that work forward into the next year to consider. I think that's about all I can remember from that session. But if anyone has anything else that I've missed, please do come in.
That's excellent, Joey. It's jogging my memory too now. Like, I'm realizing how much was discussed in that earlier session.
Yeah.
I have a comment, but I'd just like to open it up to others first of all, just to see if anyone has anything to flag up there to sort of bring all of our attention back to a key point in that session. I see Jen Durden's got her hand up.
Yeah, I think we maybe we lost the nice impact from that purposes discussion as a thread through our following working group discussions. And so I guess we might need to think about where it's appropriate to add that back in. There's certainly some good things about constraining our giant set of questions here to something a bit more manageable using that purposes. And I think that was the purpose in determining the purposes, as it were, the meta purpose. So I think that's really useful, and we shouldn't lose the fact that work's been done there and decisions have been made, and we should carry that through. There may be some areas here where, especially where we're connecting to work that's being done with other groups or at a wider scale, where we don't want that constraint. For example, I don't know, I was thinking about data storage, something like that. Or it might be advantageous for funding or other things to open that up. But in general, I think we should be mindful of that in keeping this a manageable set of tasks, something we can actually accomplish. And I guess that brings up a wider issue, which is more about the overall governance of the big picture going forward, which was already brought up at the end of the first little summary there. But that connective tissue, and I think in day 2 we had more discussion about connections between working groups, but I guess this is one obvious missed connection maybe between working groups that we could work on improving.
Yes, excellent point, Jen. And really the purposes were a big feature of the first workshop, and that's one of the reasons why the purposes were one of the first things to be tackled almost immediately after the first workshop. And it's such a nebulous, tricky thing to try and quantify, but the 3 that came out of it that have gone into the quality assurance framework, I suppose, are the 3 easy wins in the purposes, in the suite of reasons why we would use imagery. And I'm really glad that you made that connection, Jen, because it's sort of, they are central to so many of the pieces of work. So is the suggestion going forward then to for us all, in particular for every project working group, to be very mindful of what the purposes of what the current standardized purposes are, but also the fact that there's the possibility to develop other purposes, and that going forward, if we can try and pin things on the purposes, they're almost like a central point that can be used to interrelate things to one another.
I think it maybe just points to the democratization or not of the oversight of it. There's certainly some balance there between getting lots of input from lots of people, but then also having somebody designated as the person to be remembering about who might still need to be involved that's currently not involved, which groups should be connecting together that are maybe forgetting to connect together, and how decisions made by one group need to be accounted for in another group's work. And so some of that is democratic and some of that is maybe autocratic, right?
Yeah.
And there's also a cost associated with that. So I guess, I mean, really see the facilitation here as, something that probably requires government funding to keep that going. And I think that has to be like a really active role. Otherwise, we stand the chance of all the wheels on the bus going off in different directions.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's interesting now that that's the second time that we've touched on that idea in the session so far, and we've only just started. Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit more actually about the coordination committee, which is our structure that we've agreed on to take those things forward. And I think their role is going to be perhaps a lot more important than envisaged at the moment. So yeah, that's going to be quite an interesting discussion as we move through the rest of the session. So yeah. Let's keep your thoughts on that. And I will just do a quick check for any further questions. Magnus has highlighted that there are still problems that need resolving in amongst agencies. Considerations such as sample size, video still or both. What statistical tests? Yep. It's all there. It's still there to figure out. And I think having centralized common purposes can help do that. A suggestion earlier on was, for example, the monitoring purpose, dividing that up into habitats. So monitoring this type of habitat, and you can develop perhaps a set of sort of sample size, video, statistical recommendations for that. So it's almost like a sub-purpose in a way. That's maybe a route that these things will fan out and be kind of almost like a classification system, but we need to not make things too complicated too, if that's possible. And Graham has said, coming from a Medin background, an autocratic executive tying together all the thematic working groups is very helpful. Yes, but benevolent, what do they call it? Benevolent autocrats? Benevolent dictators are the ideal scenario. But yeah, they're quite hard to come by. So yeah, the more on the action plan coordination committee, later on. And I'll just go back to hands, see if we've got any hands up. I don't see any hands up. If anyone does have a comment, say, or I'll just move on. Yeah. Okay, great. That's good, Joey. Thanks for that. We move then on to Jess. Jess, you had an interesting session, I believe.
Hi, yeah, so I think it's probably worth caveating before I even start trying to summarize what was discussed on Wednesday morning, that it was a really fantastic session with loads of engagement, which has made it a little bit tricky to actually write up all of some kind of summary on this session. So if I have missed things, I do apologize. Please make sure to put them in the chat or correct me on them, because we had a really interesting session from Kerry, Dan and Graham about AI and data flows, and yeah, lots and lots of exciting stuff was mentioned. I guess starting off with Kerry looking at kind of AI as a platform and what the future could look like and where we're at now, and steps that need to be considered. There was mention of the fact that we still need to deal with low visibility in imagery, and that is still a problem regardless of machine learning. We need to think about that when we're looking at our images, and that it's fine if we have consistent errors, so errors that are the same, but inconsistency is really difficult for any kind of machine learning or AI. And a real kind of chatter about engaging with the data science community and how we could draw them in to help build things, build infrastructure and machine learning platforms for us, or using what's already out there, and making sure that we do also bridge that gap though with data science, that it's not going to be always 100% applicable for our stuff, and there will be some work that we'll have to do to convert that into our purposes instead of theirs. There was a mention of potentially doing something like a hackathon or a competition to get the computer scientists in to help build some infrastructure for that, and that there's loads of work going on, not just in fauna, but also in sediment classifications by geologists. But there we also have to bear in mind, though, that because there will be some fauna or kind of specific species that are more easily actioned with machine learning, there may be a bias towards those, and that's something we need to be aware of when we're looking at machine learning and imagery, that species with variety of color morphs or differences, they're going to be more difficult to capture, and it may be something that we just need to be aware of. And kind of looking at how we want to also attribute data effectively for that sharing. If we're going to share data, how are we going to attribute that back to the organization? And also from a kind of an ownership perspective for journals and articles, kind of encouraging that within that platform, and whether we should look at using DOIs or kind of a different way of accrediting the data back to the provider, so that it's it can be used in a positive way for journal publications as well. But we really need standards. Something that came out of that session with Kerry is to make sure that we can facilitate that sharing. We need to standardize what we're collecting in the first place. Dan then chatted about imagery retention and how to hold imagery. Should we be holding imagery once, or should we be holding it many times? What imagery should be held on a remote storage if we're looking at it, and how do we plan on managing with increasing storage needs going forward? Do we want to have it as a, there is cheap ways of doing that, but centralizing it could be a big expense. Do we want to distribute that to different people? And getting the standards right is key to the storage problem as well, because it's all linked in together. And the question of, do we need to store everything? Are we hoarding stuff that we shouldn't be hoarding? And that kind of flurried a lot of conversation at that point about what we should be holding and why. And then Graham went in to talk about catalogues involving imagery and how we can do that if it's got a low value for academics to put stuff online, but it's a high value for people to use it. How can we encourage that? If it can be published and centralized, appropriate credits can be given. Maybe that's a way around that. And many catalogues aren't available outside of people within that actual institution that's a presence for. So there's an element of everyone having their own image catalogue and the need for some kind of centralization with that. And training data sets for AI need to have similar conditions to be able to be used in machine learning. So if we're looking at AI, you'd need to have same lighting, and that's a potential problem with the data sets that we have, because everything is slightly different or variable, and that's a problem at the moment. And we need to understand what we mean when we say metadata, because that was something that came out in the comments as it can mean different things to different people, and that's quite important that we capture that and standardize that as well. There was also a talk, another, Dan's kind of second chat about there was a mention of ethical considerations of data storage, in the light of climate change. How do we limit our impact? And that's something to think about. How do we factor that into future planning? And there was an action to kind of pull together a summary document of data flow diagrams for circulation, or link things together so that we can share them more effectively. And I think in the whole discussion we had, there was a lot of talk about making stuff available, which I think has been a key theme today as well, about how we can share what we have and not duplicate things, not reinvent the wheel, make sure that we can look at different options for that. And there was a lot of really good funding suggestions for that, NERC funding, or and different ways potentially to do that within NERC, and to look at maybe more wider funding, NSF funding. Yeah, lots of talk about how to do that and how to dress up data in a way that would be applicable, would be advantageous for people to put that funding into place. So how we can look at doing that in the future. And we had a really fantastic talk from Kakani yesterday evening, which I'll mention briefly here as well, that was talking about FathomNet. That has been recorded, so if you weren't able to catch that, that will be made available, and I would really recommend watching that, because it was a really interesting discussion about this new platform that they're building at Embari to kind of produce training data sets for AI and machine learning, and kind of how that data can be used more widely, and images and things are being tagged effectively, and a lot of work's gone into that. So it's definitely something to check out if you weren't there yesterday. And yeah, loads of stuff came out of that I'm not going to try and cover now, because I will forget things. And I think that was the main things that I captured. I'm aware I probably have missed stuff though, so apologies in advance.
No, Jess, that's an awful lot of points that you did capture, actually. So I'm very glad to hear it. I can ask everyone on the call again. If we've got any sort of additional things that they remember that that can be added to that, the good summary, and or just any thoughts or reflections.
Everyone's brain's too fried.
Yeah, I think we've got to be gentle on ourselves in this final session. Yes, Graham.
So I was trying to actually remember myself the points that Jess made. There's that many points. I was like, was it mentioned? No, yeah. I mean, certainly just to sum up my side of things, it just boils down to, if everything can talk and everything connects, then the whole thing just works. But we haven't got those links and ways of linking yet. So I think that's the first step, for our working group. I'm probably going to get this in the wrong order, but someone mentioned it in the previous, one of the previous sessions was basically standards leading to services, leading to systems. And that's really the way that you need to build it. You can't build the services unless you can get the standard, and you can't connect the systems unless you got the services to do that off of. So we're really starting right back at the bottom there, and trying to work our way up the chain.
I mean, if I add to that, Graham, the good things are, and the difference with the last time we all met was that now we have the attention of representatives in Medin, of the BODC as well, which captures the NERC archive centers, and so I think we've got, in a way, we've got people with connections in the right places now. So it with regards to development of standards, I think we're on a good track, basically.
Yeah,
just have to
hopefully
do
we've
it.
got a good foundation. Yes, that's always a trick.
Yes. So Joey's just shared the Beagle AWS Management Console document.
So that's the document that Kerry was trying to get into the chat earlier.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Something I'd like to pick up on from Graham there, and just open up a little bit, is having a central place to put things. So Jess reminded us of this data flow diagram, and that we all seem quite interested in having a really, a much closer look at it, and thinking about different parts of the data flows, and how that might work in practice. having a central place for that, though, JNCC use Microsoft Teams for all of our kind of internal communications, the vast majority, so it works for us. There are lots of other organizations use it as well. If you're subscribed up to Office 365, I think it's often thrown in on the bundle. But where you aren't, it professes to be able to connect up seamlessly with other organizations, but in practice, we've seen that doesn't happen. And Jess and many others who have been quite involved with all of you over the last couple of years have noticed that a lot. But there were numerous other options that were considered in the last workshop. Huddle and what do you call that one? There are sort of open source ones and so on, but we need, whatever system we have to share things, it has to be easy for us to use. That's kind of one of the main goals, of course. Another goal is that we need, whatever we put in there, it needs to be safe in there. I think that's where a lot of the open systems are not safe enough for our agencies and government bodies that partake in this. And then another thing is that you sort of want to, I guess you want to be able to chat and to have sort of semi-normal conversations on it, and ideally be able to set up meetings and things like that on it too. So Teams does tick a lot of the boxes, and it works quite well when you've got it, but when you don't have it, it doesn't. And so we really want to crack this one. We want to be able to figure out something that we can all use going forward. And I'm just keen to ask the question of all of us now, if any of us know of something that ticks all of those boxes, ideally is free, but if not, doesn't cost the earth, and it's something that we can consider. Okay, on that, Jen's reminded us of data storage and maintenance progress and work in other places. Like quite rightly, what's going on in Australia. There you have CSIRO, who handle a lot of the temperate waters in Australia. It's a big sort of government research body. And then you have AIMS, who handle like a lot of the tropical side of things. They're very, very sophisticated working practices. So I think Jen's quite right. Oh, and Geoscience Australia. Okay, I hadn't come across them yet. Yeah, okay. Making connections with over there is a smart move. Well, in the meantime, I think we're stuck with Teams. I say stuck with. It's not a bad lot. It does a lot. Well, it ticks the vast majority of our boxes. The one issue we have is connectivity with other organizations. And so in terms of sharing things across the group, we can continue, JNCC can continue to facilitate that site, that platform. Yes, going forward, we are open to sort of new alternatives. But until something else comes to mind that works, we will continue to post messages in there. And once you're a member, you can feel free to put your information in there too. Like provided you're happy with sharing it. Okay, I'm going to move us on to our next overview. Steph is going to provide an overview of session 4 yesterday afternoon. Okay, thanks, Steph.
Okay, thanks, Henk. Yep. So in session 4, we talked about identification approaches, quantification approaches, and annotation software. So first up in that session was Joey O'Connor, and yeah, talking about identification. He highlighted as one of the main issues of the project working group was identifying the most appropriate and the maximum level of identification for identifying stills taxonomically. Sorry, that was a weird sentence. Yeah, and so this kind of plays into further developing, so working with EIP and the quality assurance framework, so kind of tying those in together to helping with that. You also mentioned producing a flow chart from the EIP into the identification approaches, and developing an ID system that works for shallow and deep water habitats, as well as working on standardized workflow processes. Another thing that came up was improving the quality and consistency of contract requirements, and assisting, and then yeah, also more work with other project working groups, so assisting with data flows and the image catalogs, and also working on a UK specific system based on Katami. So that came up a lot in a few different talks yesterday. And then also working on a list of imagery experts that can be shared with the community, so people that can be called upon for their expertise. And also coming up with a group name, which I don't think you guys have yet, but open to suggestions. And leaving it with formalizing a plan, securing funding, and finalizing membership. And that's all kind of in the timeline of the next month or so. I think towards the end of February, you said, April, sorry. Yeah, so that's kind of what I highlighted from that talk. And next, Henk and Ross Bullimore stepped in for John Hawes to talk about what's now quantification approaches. So they highlighted a lot of different approaches that that have been used for different projects. So looking at percent cover, count, grids, SAC4, and just kind of talking about thinking about where each one is appropriate and how we can move forward with those, and thinking about what's best based on the user and the habitat, and yeah, just kind of more project specific. So also another thing that they highlighted was using appropriate sample sizes and having more precise targets and indicators for the projects. They also mentioned the use of, I mean, when they're ready and available to everyone, using the Smarter ID and the epifaunal identification protocol, and other identification protocols like that will help to standardize processes in the future. And also just continuing to collaborate with the imagery community. So, and then another thing that was brought up was exploring the quantification of biomass data. Yeah, so that was talked about a lot with like points and polygons and things like that. And then also just considering that eventually, sometime in the near future, there will be a transition from human annotation quantification to AI or machine learning. So thinking about how to work that into the group, and yeah, going from there. And then another thing that they highlighted as a core task was bringing the taxonomic and morphologic ID and enumeration or quantification into one place. So creating more of a bespoke approach for the group. And lastly, Mark Burton talked about annotation software. So he gave us a brief overview of a lot of different software that he's trialed, some that he is also considering and wants to look into. Basically, there's a lot that he went through and a lot of pros and cons for each one. One thing that came up was that different organizations have different access. So not everyone can use the same software program, but Mark said that rather than kind of telling people what to use and, you know, making suggestions, that it might be more helpful to have a list of desirable features for each tool, so people can use that to decide what they might want to use in the future. And then also working with other groups like the EIP with the data flow working groups and AI, basically a lot of them, and think about what these features might be, and kind of collaborate on that to see what might be most helpful for everyone. And another key takeaway was that the software developers are really keen to work with everyone on these projects, and they want to kind of cater to the uses of everyone. So it's good to kind of keep them in the loop rather than, you know, thinking about creating new software, things like that, maybe working on updated things and get input from everyone and start just being in contact with them constantly to think about, yeah, how to make it more suitable. And yeah, those are my points.
Right. Thanks, Steph. A huge amount of information in your session as well, actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, a lot of it connects up, because the identification, the quantification of whatever you've identified, and whether you use a computer, which most of us do it, or whether you don't. That's all. It's all very connected. Are there any other key points that anyone on the call would like to make with regards to identification, enumeration, and the annotation software going forward? Okay, so looking at some of the comments that are in the chat, of which there are quite.
I'm not.
Oh, I was actually scrolling up. That's why there are so many. I was like, oh my God, there are a lot of comments in here. Yeah. So okay. Any hands up? Let me see. Any hands up? No. Okay. Conversation. Okay, that's fine. I think at this point. I think at this point we just acknowledge that there's a huge amount of information that we've covered, really, and these summaries are sort of bringing it all to the surface again, just how much is going on here. Mark's saying good job, Steph. Graham's mentioned that I think raw annotation should definitely be studied and compared with other quantification methods for performance and efficiency. Yeah, it's quite simplistic. I know, probably Jen's maybe got a few thoughts on this too, but often the way to take some of these things forward is to just come up with a standard set of images or a standard set of something that you have a good idea of what it is, and then run all your methods through that one thing, and then compare the outputs through some way. Maybe Jen, I think your hand just went up.
I'm not really sure what you mean by raw annotation.
Graham, are you able to clarify raw annotation?
So just doing annotation. So previous studies just look at people counting things on the screen in their head, and there's not been too much comparative studies with people actually using a touch screen or something like that just to draw annotations on a screen at the same time.
Oh, we do have those now. Yeah,
we do have now. Okay, so I'm behind it. Yeah, so it just intrigues me, because to me that actually could be quicker than trying to do all these different quantification methods, and you can still derive the quantification methods from that data.
I think the piece that you're missing there is the strategy. So like, just like we talk about survey design, like where you're going to take your pictures and how many you're going to take and what devices you're going to use to take them, what other information you take. There's also like a strategy and planning to how you decide to annotate, planning your annotations. So I don't know, I've done some research and published a bit about this, but that's like sort of to get back to a bit about what Ross Bullimore was talking about in the last session earlier, which is your workflow of, I call it preparing to annotate. But which subset of your pictures are you going to annotate? What processing are you going to do beforehand? Are you going to have one annotator do it or multiple annotators? How are you going to divide that up? Who's going to annotate what? and in what size groups, and over what period. If you've got video, are you going to chop it into pieces and then randomize them, or are you going to do it on a transect basis? I think these are important decisions that we often A, make in haste, and B, don't document. That also includes, am I only interested in one taxon, or am I interested in everything? Am I interested in biomass, or am I interested in point counts? Am I interested in percentage cover? Am I interested in some of the quantification methods that were mentioned earlier this week? 25 points on a screen, SAC4, individual based. These are all decisions that often have a basis in statistics and in the outcome results, and should obviously be related to your aims. So I think that's an area of research that I have right now in looking at examining some of those aspects about how you decide what your annotation strategy is going to be, or how you prepare to begin annotating. It's also something that some of the other members of my group at NOC are working on, putting together some information, particularly related to seabed images that are used in the deep sea mining realm, and the regulation of that, which of course relates to conservation, marine protected areas, monitoring, etc.
I think we'd all find it really helpful, Jen. Anytime you come out with any new research, new published research that that can help people with what you call kind of preparation for annotation. Those kind of decisions that you make beforehand. I don't think we give that enough thought, to be honest. I speak for myself, but in general, I suspect it's not something that's considered as much as it should be. And connecting with the purposes could be a good way to try and standardize that approach, if possible.
I think the tricky thing, maybe on a wider front here, is like, we're all off doing work and we're gaining experience, we're trying things out and succeeding or failing, or somewhere in between, most of the time. Some people are writing up protocols. We've had a bunch of them dropped in the chat today and yesterday. We're finding out what other people are doing. This is all great, but I guess there's a balance to be had between just sending that out to everybody in the big picture, which maybe circumvents the value of the working groups, right? Like, the whole point of the working groups is to bring that information together, evaluate it on everybody else's behalf, and then sort of highlight the things that they think are important, or whatever related to the tasks. So I guess there's some balance to be had there between just spamming everyone so they can read and see what's going on, and also then making sure that the working groups are maybe sifting through that information, and providing kind of a concise evaluation of it.
Yes. So like a hierarchical approach is probably quite a good idea in that instance.
I mean, I don't mind sending out. I'm happy to send out anything I write to anybody who wants to read it. In fact, I'm just shocked that anybody wants to read it to begin with. But I'm grateful.
I'm sure we would love to read it. It's finding the time. It seems to be most people's problem at the moment.
Yeah, so I was gobsmacked earlier today that somebody said they'd read something that I wrote that was 72 pages long. So there's a lesson there. But I think that like, the value of the working group shouldn't be diminished here. So we can send everything out, but the reason why we have a working group is because there are people that are especially interested in wanting to invest in that. So we should use them.
Yes. I think Mark Burton agrees as well. Mark, you said you like the idea of working groups, and you've got your hand up too.
Yeah, I had a hand up for a different reason, but no, I think that is the value of the working groups. That can save us all a lot of time. They can summarize it and give us the concise, useful information. So yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea if we've got the working groups, use them. The other thing I was going to add to Steph's summary was a discussion I very briefly had with Graham and Ross and Dan this morning, and that was how we archive our annotations and the sort of workflow that makes what are essentially working areas into some sort of archivable product at the end of it, because a lot of work goes into those annotations. And with the FathomNet project and possibly other sort of training things that came out of today's talks, it'd be really useful to have examples of annotated images or subsections of images where we've quality assured them and we can be fairly sure of the ID. So that's one thing I think the image annotation working group can work on. In fact, I will get in touch with Beagle on that, and I'm going to try and see what their advice is for exporting my annotations and then how we could share those with other people.
Yes, that sounds great, Mark. And I think it connects a little bit with something that Graham was saying a few days ago, where they're looking at coming up, considering developing an annotation standard approaches that might help with that. Is that what?
Yeah, I just said
what Graham's just saying. Yeah.
Yes, that's one specific piece that we're working towards, as a general standard. So yeah, it's worthwhile working together on that.
Right. Well, I'll approach Biggle directly and see what they suggest and get an export, and then I'll get in touch with you and we can see what we can do with it. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Great. I'll come to Graham's made an interesting point there, but if we first go to Joey, he's got his hand up.
Thanks, Henk. Yeah, I think it's just coming back on what Jen's saying about the kind of the process and making sure that having the process in place before you start doing the work. I think, and think about that in the wider group versus the project working groups, and I think there's a lot of things there. And if you think about it from the annotation perspective, all the guidance documents and the ways that people do work and set up work, I think that's really interesting stuff for everyone to be able to access. But then I think at the other end of the process, so people go away and do their work, there's a job there then to review that in the wider context that the work sits in its purpose, or in whatever theme we can put it into, and then compare those results and see, okay, has it worked? Has your process, has the way you've designed what you're doing done the job that you want it to do? And if we've got a group of people, a project working group, that's trying to assess, okay, what's the best way of doing a thing for multiple purposes or one purpose as appropriate, being able to take those examples, those studies into account is how that work then we progress for the wider group. So just something about the whole group, the everyone side of it versus the working group, and the role in doing and also reviewing what is done in the specific themes.
Yes, and then by having the interested people working in the project working group, they're almost refining things before they make it outside of the group, which touches a bit on what Jen was saying about getting the project working groups who have a specialism in some ways or a specialty interest in the area to digest the information and then make it more palatable, easier to pass on to everyone else.
Yeah, which should mean that when you come back around to designing, preparing your workflows or whatever it is for your next piece of work, it's building on what's been done by yourself or others previously.
Yeah. I like it. Great. Skirting back to Graham's comment about said it's a non-important question, but I think it's interesting, is sort of just in the background thinking about what we can learn from AI processes, what we as people can learn from AI processes is about how we approach an annotation. And Jen says yes, and vice versa, which is quite interesting, because the algorithm approaches the image in some ways quite differently to how a human brain would. So Claude says, along with a reference set of annotated images, sometimes they're done in context. The context is not discussed always, I think. So in the case of, say, FathomNet or iNaturalist, may do the identification based on geography. Would you mind explaining that like a little bit more, Claude?
Sure. I just meant that it's something you can have. We often basically we look at an image, say how good it is, how can you identify it? And if you say it's not good enough to identify, you go to the next best level. But there are some cases if you have only certain species in a region, you'll know, well, I see this thing as a Asterias. I know there can only be Asterias rubens here, that sea star there. Whereas you go to another region, we have several species that might look like that, so you have to go there. But depending where you are, it can be depending on context. So an image, if it's good enough to identify, sometimes it's not good enough, but because where you know you took it, you know it can only be certain kinds of taxon. So in some cases and I find that's happening in the naturalist community a lot. Like people will go like, well, you could say in region in the Atlantic, this is only kind of fish here, or in the Pacific, though, oh, but here we have only one. So you know you can be certain about it, even though it's not so clear. And so it's something, I guess it's not discussed, because we're often talking about quality and saying, is this image good enough to be used? But sometimes the knowledge of what is available in a region can affect, you can make a decision or you can make an assumption. It's hard, it seems strange. It's an assumption made, but it's based on the spatial aspect of what you know was found in that area. And sometimes
doesn't that bias your results though, if you assume that something is somewhere because other people said it was somewhere?
No, based on captures or known distributions.
Yeah, but like I guess distributions are changing, so
yes, no, that's not so. But
and that may be part of your question.
No, but there's just it's something that goes back and forth. It's not set in stone, but there are sometimes you can make and by testing that, by putting that out there and saying, I'm saying it's this because of the region, then the community will discuss and say, actually, I think the distribution changed. I just had this discussion yesterday with a fellow talking about octopuses, and they're saying the species octopus found in Gulf of Maine and in New England. And I'm going, it's probably this other one because those ones are known from the Arctic, and he's using older guides that all said this, but oh, he said the distribution is changing, climate change. And I'm going, it's not the distribution change, it's your information that was been changed. That we know now that there are two species and that's not there, and the only one found is this one here. But so that older records don't show that, but the newer records are showing these changes. And we're seeing a lot of it because of these online things, because of OBIS, GBIF. There's a lot of work going on, like what you're seeing where is changing almost because we have historical records, but then people are seeing the photos and saying, aha, we even like, the example of Penatula was a really good one, was it earlier today? For a long time in our region in Canada, we were calling things Penatula, and because that makes sense. This is what's found in the region. Penatula, one of these Penatulas is probably there. But then someone posted a photo from a submersible and online, and I saw that was not Penatula at all. It was another one called Anthoptylum. But because it made sense, that species was present, we've been saying, well, it makes sense that species be there, and everyone even saw their photos, they said it was that. But until we compared the photo to someone else, we realized we weren't even talking about the same thing, but it was another species that was actually distributed here. So sometimes geography is an aspect it's used to quality control on annotations, because there are things that could or could not be present, but it's not foolproof, because sometimes you have to contest that and ask, well, are you sure? And so I find that's a really useful process. It goes back and forth by positing that certain things are only found in certain areas, but sometimes you want to validate that. But it comes to the question of like what images you can use. We were saying before, like sometimes the image is bad quality, no good. It may be a bad quality. Someone may comment about a reef there, maybe bad quality, but if it's something that's unique in that area and you know there's nothing else there, it's still a value. And so that's not just a question of image quality, but sometimes geography. It's another kind of context that can be useful in evaluating.
Yes, I quite agree, Claude. There were a few people mentioned the value of geotagging some imagery going forward, and that's I feel that could tie in with what you're talking about. I'd just like to bring Kerry Howland, who's got her hand up, maybe wants to talk about this point, or is it?
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely, I do. Yeah, because I completely agree. So it goes deeper than this. So this is how things are done in the terrestrial world quite a lot. So for example, bird surveys, butterfly surveys, bat counts, they're done by, we know the species pool and that flies in the right way, therefore it's one of them. And that's perfectly normal to do that. But it does rely on you having a really good understanding of your species pool, which, in deep sea is often not the case. But it's about that using environmental information to help back up your identification. And so if you know the niche the organism occupies, you know the kinds of temperatures, depths, habitat types or what have you find it on. Equally, you know that at this particular depth, and starfish are a great one, this depth in the Northeast Atlantic, there's only 5 species of starfish you're ever going to see, and only one of them looks like that. So there you go. Yes, it does, I suppose, potentially cause problems for identifying new species, but then, to be honest, to confirm something's a new species, you'd probably need the sample of it anyway, then have a taxonomist confirm it. Better to count it than not to count it. So I actually think those things are really useful. And from an AI perspective, it actually, again, provides you with additional entrances into identifying your organism. So you can start to think about the use of multiple access keys, which are field keys to identifying your animal, and that can include environmental information. But it is all based on a concept of understanding your pool, your species pool, and the niche your species occupy in order to kind of back up your identification with, well, it fits, it's in the right habitat, it's in this right place. But I think, again, these are things that we can, I would hope we would work towards. We're not there yet, but we can definitely bear it in mind.
If you don't mind, Claude, I'd just like to bring in Jen Durden again. I think you've raised some quite interesting points there. So maybe, is that what you want to comment on, Jen?
I just want to say, FathomNet isn't doing any identification itself. It's like a broker to provide images to people who want to develop AI. So people want to develop AI, they need a bunch of pictures to look at, and that's what FathomNet is providing, or you are providing if you give your pictures to FathomNet indirectly through them. So FathomNet's like the Amazon marketplace of people looking for images to work on AI stuff with. And the AI identification doesn't work in any way like the taxonomic way that we think about. So that's not true. It does do what Carrie just said. It might be like, that bird flies in a certain way. We know that flight pattern is common to this group, but it doesn't necessarily, the people who are developing AI can use any criteria they want to develop their algorithms. So it could be something you think of, which is optically very obvious, like color, size, shape, but it could be loads of other things. And now the AI is working on, using pictures of ice cream cones and fire hydrants in order to train it to tell you what kind of fish it is. So I think we can't necessarily put our normal cognitive functions, transpose those into a way that AI is doing the identification, because it does not work at all like that. So I just wanted to set people's expectations about how those things are working and what those things might be doing. Sure, there are people that are developing AI around using other information that's available. It could be geographic, could be environmental, to help them do their identifications, but that's not everybody. That might be an area of exploration. We don't know how successful it is just yet. They're also doing the same things, by the way, for using AI to classify bathymetry in a similar kind of vein. So yeah, I mean, really, FathomNet is just providing some information, like basically some sand for the sandbox, so that they can mess around in it, right? And your sand might be wet, or it might be dry, it might be coarse, it might be fine. That's what they want. That's what they need to work with.
Yeah.
I was just adding on there, I think one of the things we should do is add up how many annotations we actually have between us, because we must have so many. Like our group alone has more than FathomNet, so between us all we must have a ton of annotations.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question.
I mean, FathomNet's just getting started, so it won't have very many just yet. If we all put our stuff in there, then it'll have lots.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't mean that. I was more surprised that Mbari only had that many, but I know why, but like it just surprised me.
Yeah, well, quite right. If everyone, Claude's got about 100,000 too, so it's sort of we could yeah. I think that's the promise of the future. But to get there, you need to be using some sort of annotation software to make the digital annotation. Yeah, that's a big change that we've had since the first workshop, at least with many organizations here on the call. Thank you, Claude, Kerry and Jen there. I'm going to move us on to the final summary by Kirsten, who hasn't had a lot of time to put it together, seeing as it was only just like an hour or two ago, and you had to eat and well, so Kirsten, can you give us a run through then, just a recap, especially for those who weren't really around this morning, on what happened in session 5, please?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, as Henk said, apologies if I have missed anything, because kind of frantically tried to do this over lunch. So I'm sure I've not captured everything accurately. And also, I don't know what my neighbour's doing outside with like heavy machinery, but if you can hear that, apologies for that as well. So we had 3 speakers in session 5. We had Jamie Davis talking about training approaches, then Ross Billimore talking about workflow guidance, and then finally Henk talking about technology and imagery acquisition reviews. So Jamie she gave us a really nice presentation about the work that they're doing already at the University of Plymouth, how they're kind of trying to move away from teaching students using like lab-based specimen kind of studies, and pushing a bit towards imagery, and how they're developing this smarter ID catalogue as well as other training videos and material, and they're kind of trialing this on students, I believe at the moment, or coming up. So the project working group for this, they haven't formally met yet. That's kind of, again, hopefully happening soon. But so the work they've been doing so far is kind of been on the back of work that Plymouth University were doing already. So looking forwards from this, yeah, project working group hoping to meet within the next kind of few weeks, maybe a bit of reprioritization of tasks and kind of identify things that maybe other organizations are doing with, which I know has been a running theme of the whole workshop. We don't want to be like overlapping and duplicating effort. So I know one thing that was brought up was a lot of different organizations are writing what sound like very similar guides to using Biggle or other annotation softwares. So kind of want to push for sharing of these. There was also some discussion about the actual learning process with Biggle as well. It seems like many people kind of like go in pretty blind and learn by making mistakes and kind of like learn how not to do it, which is pretty time consuming. But it seems to be quite a common problem, hence why all these various documents are being created. And then finally, people were talking about how the Smarter ID catalogue could be sort of combined with the work of the EIP, the Epifauna Identification Protocol group, to kind of create another reference training catalogue on what we could identify things as based on the image quality. And then we moved on to Ross talking about workflow guidance. So this is another one where the working group haven't yet engaged, obviously just due to everyone's kind of time constraints, but CFAS have been kind of volunteering as a lead just due to the overlap with their own work packages and how they align quite well with the tasks of the workflow guidance group, just due to the amount of imagery acquisition and analysis that's going on in-house for them anyway. But they're really emphasizing that they want to create products or tools which are accessible and usable by everyone across the big picture group and beyond. So kind of identified that a key issue is that we're often collecting more imagery than is possible to be analysed by humans. And there's also a lot of discussion around, like, depending on what your imagery is for, how we all kind of work to different standards of what's usable and what's sort of satisfactory and acceptable. So coming up with some sort of like standards or guidance document, or like a decision tree or something, could be really useful again for everyone, just to kind of decide how to like group. If we use the word bin, because I guess some images would be binned just due to storage kind of constraints, but also binning things into like levels of what they could be used for. And again, another one where there's likely a lot of overlap with other organizations and project working groups. Many people will be already working on like workflow guidance documents or like process sheets. So kind of encouraging collaboration there. And yeah, Ross was very keen for people to come forward with feedback and ideas and any critique, because at the end of the day, the key purpose of this group is to make tools which are useful to everyone. So the more kind of input we get at the early stages, the better. And then we had a discussion about funding and how pitching for funding for this kind of task is quite difficult in itself, because it's not like sexy science. So there's kind of talks of either sort of grouping all of the like boring tasks together and pitching for funding in a sort of look where it could help us get kind of way, or if the sort of less exciting tasks could like either piggyback off the like easier to pitch projects, or continue to do as they're doing now, which is basically like going alongside the business as usual work for a lot of organizations. But the problem with that is obviously that things then happen quite sporadically and probably take quite a lot of time due to the lack of funding and the lack of like dedicated time just for that. So I think that's all I had for that one. Apologies again if I've missed anything, and I'm not sure if Ross is still on the call. But we then moved on to technology and imagery acquisition reviews. So Henk gave us an overview of the kind of the subgroups of the tasks involved in this. So it's not a formal project working group yet. It's still very much a kind of like cluster of tasks that haven't really come together. But a really interesting thing that came out of this was that the consensus seems to be that a project working group was necessary, which is something that we weren't too sure coming into this workshop if people would agree on or not, because it was kind of bumped to the bottom of the priority list before the workshop in November, which I know a lot of you were at. But it seems like people really do want this to form a working group. And yeah, for the potential, so we had a few interesting discussions regarding the potential for UK/English government agencies to collaborate, produce guidance documents on equipments that they may already all be using, and if there was any possibility for that to happen. There was talk of some aspects of this project working group maybe being added into the workflow guidance group. And again, maybe possible for more engagement. And if we can identify some sort of shared access platforms, if we're undertaking sort of literature reviews of any kind, then even something as simple as Mendeley libraries were mentioned, or again, obviously using the team sites if everyone's able to access them. There's also discussion about for all of these different technologies and ways that we collect imagery, we don't necessarily, again, have to come up with minimum standards. We can have a sort of decision tree as well, rather than setting absolute minimums. And again, a lot of discussion around the fact that it's not all about camera resolution and the technology itself, but also about how we use it. So, you know, us as humans, human error and variables in our kind of like day-to-day working, as well as environmental conditions, and the fact that people don't necessarily need to be going out and buying brand new technologies and spending thousands and thousands of pounds, when instead we could be producing documents and looking into how we could better use equipment that we already have. So a lot of people were talking about just knowing how to set up your lighting and your lasers and have everything calibrated properly can make a world of difference. And then, yeah, again, the fact that acquisition is only as good as the kind of supporting software, so like your annotation softwares and users, and then operating and storage systems of computers. Again, there's no point in going out and collecting, you know, incredible, super high quality 16K video if you are unable to store and view it effectively. And then, yeah, finally, we just touched on the fact that these projects may be quite well suited to student projects as literature reviews, or could feed into like piggyback off wider projects that are already ongoing. So I think that is everything I have. I'm sure I've missed some stuff. I just, yeah, didn't have time to kind of get a full summary together over the past hour. So yeah, if anyone has anything to add, please go ahead.
I think that's quite a good account, Kirsten, because there was a lot of information that came up there, and you've captured a lot of the key points. Mark's got his hand up. Yes, Mark?
A bit of a plug for the MCS C-Search courses. So going right back to the training one, it wasn't specifically mentioned, but maybe there's universities out there who want to do BIGL courses and how to use it, but then they'll also need to do an identification course. I would have thought the MCS C-Search Observers course, which in Wales now is being running online rather than face-to-face, so is absolutely built around pictures and videos. I would have thought that would be a very good way to train students or analysts really who weren't familiar in British shallow seas, so down to about 30 meters diveable depths across a whole range of phyla, and get them to a point where they'd be reasonably sure that they were getting the groups right at the very least, and where to go and look if they needed to go deeper than that. With a bit more development, I think that could easily be brought into a bespoke training course that works for the EIP, or, you know, looking at particularly at annotation softwares and specific label trees. So it wasn't really mentioned there, and shallow water wasn't mentioned quite so much, but just to keep that in people's mind, I think that MCS C-Search Observers course will easily translate to help with students and annotators.
Yes, thanks, Mark. It sort of brings us to, well, it makes us think of the value of kind of public data, citizen science in general, and that there are so many thousands of other pairs of eyes out there collecting information all the time. And I think there are annotation platforms, like I think that's the way iNaturalist works in part. But thanks for bringing that up. Those are Marine Conservation Society, is that right? MCS?
Yeah. Sorry, MCS is Marine Conservation.
Did I get that
Society.
right? Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
great.
Right.
Thanks. Clive Fox got his hand up.
Yeah, it was just to add to that, that C-Search do also organise more specialist courses as well for people who are interested in getting to grips with specific groups of organisms. So there is quite a lot of training material and books and things out there already. It's not been sort of particularly updated into the digital world yet.
I imagine with the trends towards online working, though, and online living, that's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's a matter of funding again, I think,
yeah.
particularly for essentially a charity sort of organisation.
Great. Thanks for that, Clive. I'll hand over to Dan now.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that the CSearch community are also engaged with us through Dash and the Medin community in getting their data in a standard format already. So we're kind of halfway there. So if we are looking at alternative routes to capture citizen science type data, then yeah, we're kind of moving in the right direction with the standard side. It was also to pick up your point about iNaturalist. So I think I mentioned the other day that we're shortly, and I mean very shortly, April time, going to be launching the UK node of iNaturalist, which will give us better access to all the data and the images behind that. So there are questions around the quality control and quality assurance of that data, but if we've got a community that is willing to be engaged with it and provide another level of quality assurance, then there's no reason that data can't be used as well.
Yes. Sam Hombre is mentioning that the Eastern IFCA, England also work alongside CSearch carrying out ID training courses as well. So it's worth sort of noting that the IFCAs work around the English coasts, but CSearch also work around the English coast. In fact, you've got CSearch all over the UK. I don't know if they're in the Republic of Ireland, but they are a fantastic organization that facilitate getting people into the water, and more increasingly people do take photographs when they're down there. I used to I had a grand dream of equipping them somehow with like a suite of standard cameras, and they could all go out with photo quadrats and take cameras, but well, that's another conversation. I'll move us on at that point then. So thank you to all of our facilitators for helping the presenters along, and for keeping a record of what was discussed in the sessions there. The summaries there just show you the wealth of information that that we've come across over the last couple of days. So I'll just move us on to the final bit of the session here, as to review the workshop objectives. So we set out on Tuesday. We set out on the first day with four objectives. One, to share progress that's happened towards achieving the Benthic Imagery Action Plan through the presentations and the discussions of our work. Next up, we had sort of three objectives that were grouped together that we largely thought we'd tackle through the conversations that followed every presentation. One was to identify the funding routes for project working groups. Another, to consider and identify global outreach opportunities, and even just in the last hour there have been quite a few useful suggestions for areas of the world that we could branch out and explore what research is going on over there, what working practices are already established there. And all along there have been mentions of not just future challenges, but ideas and other ways of going forward as a group. And I would just like to pause for a moment, and bearing in mind that what we've come up with over the last couple of days, you've heard a summary of it there, just there now, and this is going to be condensed, summarized into a report. But just to ask ourselves, have we met these objectives over the last couple of days? Or to what extent have we met these objectives? For a start, maybe a few videos to see either heads heads shaking like that, like, now we missed the mark, or a few hands up, or what do you think, Jen?
Well, I mean, we're not done, but we've made a great start.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you. I would like to see more. Personally, I think the funding side is a blockage for a lot of us. I think it seems like we can keep factoring in the work as we do, because it's the work that we're doing, and there seem to be kind of not easy wins, but it is easier to bolt on some of these pieces of work that we've discussed onto existing things that we've already got going and planned. And that might be the way to bring in some of the less sexy projects, as we were talking. But with regards to the more attractive, the more appealing looking projects, the ones that lend themselves more to potential funding routes, I think some of our discussions rounded up on consolidating the idea, which is happening, but then dressing it up, finding places where the idea could be lodged, and dressed up to meet a funding call, say. That seemed to be where we were going with that. We got anyone to agree or to disagree with that? Kerry, you got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the way, in my experience, the way to get the actual necessary science funded is to, dress it up as whatever the buzzword is of the day. And actually, on this, I think we're in luck in the sense that autonomy and that kind of thing is pretty much very high on the list with particularly NERC anyway. I've no idea about DEFRA. And so I do think there are ways and means of getting the important stuff done by having it as, necessary steps in order to achieve, the big AI stuff. I would say that, of course, because that's what I'm quite interested in. But I do think it is a way to get it done, and I certainly think we should try it.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
I would just like to say I'm grateful for all the pro bono effort that's already gone into this. People have done a lot of work here, basically off their own backs, and that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. Yeah. I think that's a running theme, which I'd like to round up on in our final close of the day, which everyone will hopefully be able to make. But it's essentially around how fantastic it is to have a group of people so interested in this and working together, and it really shows the value of this. Magnus has mentioned as a new participant, he's found it great to catch up on what's been happening, on what's been done so far with this group. So that's great to hear, Magnus. It's great to have you on board. Thank you. There are very important issues to resolve. Yes, that's what's keeping us here. As for funding, yes, it would be great. It'd be great for you to explore, whatever funding routes that you can. I think with agreeing to work in project working groups, and having people who are more active in those groups, we envisage that they will go and look for the funding routes and make the rest of the group available, make the rest of the group aware of those routes. And it'll probably work. It's almost a modular thing then, modular hierarchical governance, semi-autocratic despot sort of thing that we were discussing earlier on. I've thought also with the global outreach, I've noticed over the last couple of days that we've had some participants dialing in from Belgium and from Canada, We also had Kakani Khatija from the FathomNet project, well, working on the FathomNet project, but dialing in from the west coast of America, the US. I think we've had people dialing in from Spain. Is there anyone else on the call who's not? Oh, and the Netherlands as well. Anyone else on the call who's been dialing in from somewhere else? You don't have to flag yourself up, but maybe just pop your organization or country in the chat. It's nice to see that there are many more people interested in this work in the UK, and to me it shows me that the global outreach is side of the work is happening. Yeah, it's great, Claude. Thank you. DFO, yeah. With regards to then the future challenges, we've noted down a number of challenges. The chief among that, I think, is the actual funding itself to do the work. There have been many interesting comments with regards to the action plan itself, in considering reviewing. Gently, it was to review the priorities of tasks, but I think in earnest, really, the project working groups taking a more detailed look at the tasks that they're undertaking, and by carrying out the review to consider what's worth carrying on or what's worth merging with something else, or are there better workflows there, perhaps. I think going forward, perhaps there'll be sort of more work in that area. Yes, comment from Neil Golding.
Hi, yeah, just I guess to second what you said, Henk, about I guess the project working groups going back through some of the tasks. I think it'd be really useful, just thinking with my project management hat on, to have if the project working groups had a better idea or an understanding of the resource and the time requirements they might need for the particular tasks that are going to be going forward. I guess then if there's funding bids happening, there's a better idea about, what could be achieved with particular bids, what's too big, what's too small. And also, I guess those smaller tasks that people have said can be picked up, through other work that's happening in the people's organizations. So yeah, I think, just something to consider, really.
Yes. I think Jen's got her hand up, about that comment, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, just in addition to Neil's mention about time, I think the other critical thing is timing. And, because not all the working groups will progress at the same pace. And some things probably need to get done before other things in order to feed back and forth. So we think about the connections between the groups. I think the devil's going to be a bit in the timing there. And also it's more than likely that we won't just tick something off. Pretty much everything here is going to have to be revisited, or just it's going to be iterated, right? So it's not just like you do something once and it's over. It's like you do something and then you learn from the other work groups, and then you repeat it and improve it. So I guess we'll have to think about that in terms of coordination.
Exactly. It sounds like it's going to be a job. It's going to keep us all going for a while. Yes, they're good points there. I think the initial assessment of how urgent things were from the first version of the action plan, you could almost take a look at that again now and reassess, because things have moved on a little bit. Some things have been done, but as Jen's drawn us to, that just having completed a task doesn't mean that it's necessarily complete. Just because you've done a bit of work in it, it doesn't mean it's complete. Quite a lot of them are ongoing. I'll hand over to Joey.
Thanks, Henk. Yeah, very similar point to what yourself and Jen and I guess Neil have just made. I think the future challenges objective here from this workshop, I guess the challenges that were identified in the 2019 workshop became the tasks in the action plan. So it's a case of making sure that we capture these challenges and that they're fed into the project working groups. And I guess the report is the vehicle for doing that.
I mean, presumably working groups can add tasks or change them if they think it makes more sense for what they're working on.
I think so. Yeah. So I mean, touching on the history of this, the plan development group, which Jen and I were a part of, Charlie Lindenbaum on the call. If if Charlie's on the call, Charlie was in there. And a few others as well. Alison Benson. Anyway, we were spread out across organizations to kind of balance the load, but also give a flavor of our different working ways and so on. And when we put everything together, it wasn't meant to be a fixed thing, but it does help having a fixed thing to focus the mind. And I think that's what we've shown in the last couple of days. And I think in terms of sharing progress, having a fixed thing to look at and to focus things has helped an awful lot. But now that we're a lot more focused and we've agreed to sort of form these project working groups to tackle distinct areas, these tasks I think they need to be reconsidered. And I'm sure as time goes on, they will change a little bit, but the general gist will be the same. Okay, great. So what's in store then? So I mean, really, this session is all about the future of the big picture, and I thought I'd sort of round the session up with just that, and sharing with you what the next steps are envisaged, what next steps we envisage, but also some like a little bit of further thinking, recognizing that if you've been here for the whole workshop, now being right at the end, it's quite a lot of detail. So at this point, you can sit back. It's done. We've covered everything in a lot of conversations. We could take a breath at this point, and although there's a lot of work coming in the near future, we've really shared a lot of information. We've discussed a lot of things. We worked hard over the last couple of days, and so the next thing that's going to happen is the team at JNCC, the facilitators, are going to work with Neil to put together a summary of everything, of all the key points that we've covered over the last couple of days. It won't be absolutely everything, because there's been an awful lot that's been discussed. We also haven't got the mountain of post-it notes that we had last time for this type of thing. What we do have, though, are your chats in the chat log. We have notes that we've all made of the discussions, and we aim to put that together. And one of the things that Neil is going to need some help from the rest of the attendees on the call is to have a quick run through a draft version of the report. What we'd like to do is create a draft and to send that out to people who have been attending the last couple of days, and for them to take a quick look at it. We're talking a really rapid, overarching review. I don't think there's time for a detailed piece of work, but it's something quite quick, a really quick turnaround. Neil will send out the document and a timeline to work to, and it's really just to sort of pick out anything glaringly obvious that's not right, or glaringly obvious that needs to be included, and then that will enable Neil and the team to collate any responses that come from that. If you have the time to add, anything, and we will get that out by the end of the month. So that's our plan. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Neil? Or is that okay?
No, that sounds great, Henk. Yeah, I guess we don't have a lot of time, so I guess the key thing is, yeah, any, I guess, glaring omissions or things you feel need to be amended in the report, yeah, just jot away and get that back to us, and we can then, make those amendments and get the report finalised in time for the end of the month. Great,
okay. The reason why I mention, the report at the moment is that this is going to go on, and hopefully the idea is that this helps the discussions of the project working groups going forward. Last couple of days, the discussions alone, I think, should help the project work groups in their approaches going forward. But having the report sort of, consolidated information in there, we're hoping that's going to help kind of jog a few of the ideas. I imagine the next kind of couple of months, really, the project working groups are probably going to start getting together. They're going to start sort of discussing what happened at the workshop here, what was shared, and then begin to have a closer look at their actual tasks and ways of going forward. And we've already discussed the rough ways of working. Sometimes it's going to be a case of getting the easy wins in, where you can bolt it on to existing pieces of work. In other cases, it'll be going for small pots of funding through some of the things discussed, or it could be putting together much bigger ideas that will take longer to envisage and to actually secure the funding for, but we'll get much bigger pots of funding to help that work along. And the other things that need to happen are the Action Plan Coordination Committee, the APCC, which is essentially the steering group of the big picture group, will be meeting again. And they had a meeting about a month before this workshop to discuss this workshop and a few things from before. They'll be meeting over the next couple of months, and we'll meet frequently over the course of the year. We estimate about 3 to 4 times a year is realistic for people. Now, that the coordination committee has a very important function going forward. Over the course of this year, through fleshing out the terms of reference for the big picture group itself, it was decided that having a single coordinator, like a benevolent a dictator, like autocrat type at the top, to coordinate things, wasn't quite the ideal way of proceeding. And so we've increased that role, that function. Actually, the function has been increased and spread out across this group. And now that role, that coordination role, is more about bringing this group together, this steering group, the coordination committee together, to discuss these things. And the meetings might be fair blocks of time, considering how complex a lot of this work is. But going forward, that is the model. That is the model that has been recommended in many of the discussions over the last year. And so, yeah, we're going to see sort of a I guess an increased increased importance of this coordination committee going forward. And it's something that I just have to say, with a JNCC hat on, that JNCC will continue to commit time and resources to that coordination committee. We've been fortunate enough to develop this work with you all over the last couple of years. It's something that we feel very strongly about. It's something that that I've enjoyed immensely. So yes, it's something that JNCC want to continue doing, and those will really be our next steps. With regards to the exact things that are happening, really the project working groups and the points of contacts within them, they're going to be the places to look. Oh yeah, this slide's just to remind you of this diagram. Some of you might have caught this on the first day, but yeah, you know, you've got your project working groups made up of individuals. Everyone's a little circle in this instance, and you know, they feed up information to the coordination committee. Everyone needs funding, including the, you know, members of the committee there. There's the coordinator and the project working groups getting funding, and then yeah, the coordination role side of things, they distribute information across the big picture group, so that everyone's kept abreast of the changes. So yeah, that's just a reference back to earlier on. And longer term, there seemed to have been a fair bit of interest in the tasks in the action plan, and a few questions, you know, as to, you know, whether the tasks can be changed and whether they can be modified. And I'd say absolutely they can. Of course, you know, of course they can. We can do what we want. But with the caveat that we should maintain the central control and coordination of the overall action plan and how it moves, and what the project working groups are doing. That should be maintained at the coordination committee level, so that there is an overall coherence. And I think it was Jen pointed out, so that, you know, the four wheels of the bus don't all go off in different directions, and that's, you know, and that's the end of it, really. So the value, so I would imagine that over the next while, the action plan will need to be reviewed in some shape or form, and perhaps every project working group will review their tasks, and they will, you know, and they will go through that and refine that, and that'll become kind of, you know, like an updated version, where you see some things have been tackled, some things are more active, you know, and some things are maybe still being discussed. As a final point of this session is, maybe there'll be a big picture 3. You know, maybe there'll be an appetite for a third sort of large collaboration event such as this. Information sharing, maybe more discussion based next time, maybe sort of more information sharing like this time. Perhaps in 2 years' time, big picture 3, it could be return of the JPEG or something. I don't know. You call this the Images Strike Back, was this one. Yes, I think that's all I really wanted to cover for this session. The final session of the workshop, where we were looking at the future of the big picture, bringing everything all together and collating some final thoughts from everybody here. We've just got a few more minutes if anyone would like to make a comment before we go into the final break, and then afterwards there'll just be a you know, final half-hour closing down at the very end, just kind of a debrief. Yes, so if I ask, you know, if I open it up now for any final comments and questions. Okay, everybody, I think that is it. I don't see any more hands up. I don't see any more comments coming in. Plans are good, and as Joey says, I agree. Thank you very much for participating in this last session. Without anything else, I'll close this session now, and thanks again.